was just an old photo from 1908, a faded black and white snapshot of a bygone era. For decades, it lay forgotten, tucked away in a dusty attic box, one among countless memories of a family long past. The photograph depicted a typical street scene, bustling with the quiet energy of early 20th century urban life. Carriages, pulled by sturdy horses, navigated cobblestone streets, their wheels clattering softly against the stone. Pedestrians dressed in the fashion of the time, long coats, hats, and dresses, ambled along the pavements, their faces a blur of motion and anonymity. Majestic old buildings, their facades adorned with intricate architectural details, lined the thoroughfare, standing as silent witnesses to the passage of time. At first glance, there was nothing particularly remarkable about it. It was simply a window into a moment, a slice of ordinary life from over a century ago, a historical curiosity perhaps, but nothing more. This unassuming artifact eventually found its way to the British Museum, sent to Dr. Eleanor Vance's Department for Routine Archiving and Digitization. Dr. Vance was a name synonymous with historical photo expertise. Her reputation preceded her, known for her meticulous eye and an almost uncanny ability to unearth hidden narratives within seemingly mundane images. She was widely respected in her field. Her department handled thousands of such photographs annually, each one carefully catalogued, scanned, and preserved for posterity. The initial assessment of this particular photo was straightforward. Just another historical street scene, good for context. It was destined to join countless others in the museum's vast digital archives, providing background detail for future researchers and enthusiasts. Eleanor's team began the high-resolution scanning process, a standard procedure designed to capture every minute detail of the fragile, century-old emulsion. As the image resolution steadily increased, revealing sharper lines and finer textures with each passing moment, Ben, one of Eleanor's junior assistants, paused. His brow furrowed slightly as he peered closer at his monitor. He noticed something odd, something almost imperceptible, lurking in the deep background of the photograph. It was a small, dark shape, partially obscured by shadow and the general blur of distance, yet it seemed out of place. "Dr. Vance," Ben called out, his voice tinged with a hint of curiosity and mild confusion. "Could you take a look at this?" Eleanor, who had been engrossed in another high-resolution scan of a different Victorian landscape, initially offered a dismissive wave of her hand. "Just a trick of the light, Ben," she replied, not looking up. "These old photos often have optical anomalies." She had seen it all before. Dust specks mistaken for UFOs, lens flares misinterpreted as ghostly apparitions, smudges transforming into mythical creatures. It was part of the job, tempering youthful enthusiasm with seasoned skepticism. But Ben persisted. "No, Dr. Vance, I don't think so. It's structured, and it seems to be in a doorway. I can't quite make it out, but it feels wrong." His insistence, a rare occurrence from the usually reserved assistant, piqued Eleanor's interest. She pushed back her chair and walked over to his workstation. Leaning in, she squinted at the monitor. The shape was indeed blurry. A dark smudge against the lighter tones of the brickwork, nestled deep within the recess of a shadowy doorway. It was too indistinct to identify clearly. Yet Ben was right. There was a certain unnatural quality to its outline. It wasn't quite amorphous enough to be a simple shadow, nor did it possess the irregular edges of a photographic flaw. It was definitely something out of place, a flicker of unease, a sensation Eleanor rarely experienced with historical artifacts stirred within her. She murmured, a single syllable that conveyed both her initial skepticism and a growing acknowledgement of the anomaly. "You're right, Ben. It's peculiar. Let's try to bring out more detail, push the enhancement further, see what our digital tools can do." Ben nodded, his fingers flying across the keyboard, adjusting parameters, and applying advanced image processing algorithms. The computer screen flickered, and the pixels rearranged themselves, attempting to resolve the blurry darkness into something more coherent. The process was slow, painstaking, each incremental increase in clarity building the suspense in the quiet, climate-controlled room. The hum of the servers seemed to intensify, matching the rising tension. Eleanor and Ben leaned closer, their eyes fixed on the screen, holding their breath. What they saw next made the room go quiet. The dark shape began to resolve, slowly but unmistakably, into a figure. The ordinary street scene had just become anything but. The figure, once an indistinct smudge, coalesced into a person, standing unnervingly still within the deep shadows of a recessed doorway. It was a human form, undeniably, yet something about it immediately struck Eleanor as profoundly wrong. Its posture was too rigid, too stiff, almost like a mannequin, lacking the natural fluidity of the other pedestrians captured in the bustling street scene. The face, partially obscured by the deep shadows of the doorway, remained a mystery, a dark void where features should have been. It was as if the shadow itself had consumed the individual's identity. Eleanor felt a distinct chill, a prickling sensation on her skin, despite the comfortable temperature of the lab. The clothing, what little could be discerned, seemed off, subtly but unmistakably out of place for 1908 London. It wasn't the material, but the cut, the drape, the overall impression it gave, a stark contrast to the period attire of the other individuals in the photograph. This wasn't just an anomaly, it was an intrusion. Eleanor, her initial skepticism now completely evaporated, turned to Ben. Ben, I need you to do a deep dive on this photograph's provenance. Everything. Who took it, where, when, and any other works by the photographer that might shed light on this. Ben, still wide-eyed from the revelation on the screen, nodded silently, already typing furiously. He began by tracing the photo's origin, eventually linking it to a photographer named Arthur Jenkins. Jenkins was a relatively well-known figure in early 20th century London, celebrated for his candid street photography, capturing the raw, unposed essence of daily life. His archives, though sparse, were meticulously kept. Further research pinpointed the specific street as Baker Street, London, a familiar and iconic location, but more precisely near a less frequented alleyway that branched off the main thoroughfare. They pulled up other photographs by Jenkins from the same period, meticulously sifting through dozens, then hundreds of his works. Eleanor's hope was to find a similar anomaly, a recurring motif, or perhaps a stylistic quirk that might explain the figure. But there was nothing. Each of Jenkins' other photographs depicted authentic, unvarnished scenes of London life, devoid of anything remotely resembling the mysterious figure. The people were natural, the settings genuine. The figure in the Baker Street photo remained a singular, unsettling outlier. Eleanor's unease deepened with each passing hour. The more they looked at it, the more the figure stood out, a stark, anachronistic presence against the backdrop of an otherwise perfectly ordinary 1908 street. With renewed focus, Ben pushed the digital enhancement tools even further, coaxing out more minute details from the stubbornly dark recesses of the doorway. The figure's clothes, now slightly clearer, were indeed dark, almost uniformly so. They weren't the wools or tweeds typical of the era, nor did they resemble any known military or common civilian wear. Instead, they appeared sleek, almost tailored from an unfamiliar fabric, giving the impression of a modern, utilitarian design. And then, as the resolution sharpened further, a faint metallic glint became visible on the figure's left hand or wrist. It was subtle, reflecting the ambient light in an unusual way, hinting at a polished, artificial surface. The face, still frustratingly indistinct, began to yield some terrifying clues. The deep shadows that had obscured it now seemed to recede just enough to suggest unnaturally wide eyes. Or perhaps, Eleanor thought, it wasn't eyes at all, but some form of optical apparatus, like goggles, integrated into the figure's head or face. The overall impression was one of a blank, emotionless stare. Most disturbingly, the figure wasn't looking at the camera, nor was it interacting with the street scene, the passing carriages or the pedestrians. Its gaze, if one could call it that, was directed past everything, fixed intently on the dark mouth of the alleyway that ran adjacent to the doorway. It was a predatory gaze, focused and unwavering, a hunter observing its prey. Eleanor began to theorize, trying to force the anomaly into a conventional historical explanation. Could it be a prank? A person in an elaborate costume, perhaps for a theatrical performance, caught unawares? But the quality of the negatives, Jenkins's meticulous reputation, and the sheer subtlety of the figure's placement made a simple prank seem unlikely. A double exposure? Again, highly improbable given the technology of the time and Jenkins's skill. The figure was too seamlessly integrated into the scene, too perfectly shadowed, to be a mere photographic error. Every conventional explanation she could conjure felt flimsy, inadequate, failing to account for the growing list of unsettling details. This was something else entirely. Eleanor found herself increasingly haunted by the image, the rigid figure with its unsettling gaze into the alleyway. The details, once subtle, now screamed at her with an anachronistic intensity. She knew she couldn't keep this discovery to herself. The first person she approached was Dr. Marcus Thorne, a revered colleague and an expert in early 20th century social history. Marcus was known for his rigorous adherence to documented fact, his mind a steel trap for historical data and context. She presented the high-resolution image on a large screen in a darkened conference room, detailing their findings, the provenance of the photograph, the photographer Arthur Jenkins's impeccable reputation, the meticulous process of digital enhancement, and finally, the figure itself. Marcus initially was skeptical. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression one of polite academic dismissal. "Eleanor, my dear, it's a trick of the light, surely," he began, his voice calm and measured. "Or perhaps a damaged negative, a chemical anomaly. These old emulsions are fragile." He suggested it could be a simple case of pareidolia, where the mind perceives familiar patterns in random stimuli. But Eleanor was prepared. She patiently walked him through each specific detail. "Look at the clothing, Marcus. It doesn't conform to any known fashion of 1908. Not working class, not gentry, not even some avant-garde theatrical costume. And the posture, it's utterly devoid of natural human movement. It's too stiff, too intentional. Then there's the metallic glint on the wrist, and the gaze into the alley. It's not looking at the camera, not at the street. It's fixed, almost predatory on that dark opening." As Eleanor meticulously dissected the visual evidence, pointing out the subtle yet profound discrepancies, Marcus's initial skepticism began to waver. His brow furrowed, and he leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the screen. The confidence in his usual academic demeanor slowly eroded, replaced by a growing unease. He couldn't easily dismiss the cumulative weight of the anomalies Eleanor presented. Recognizing the need for external validation, they decided to delve deeper into the specific location. Their research into Baker Street and, more specifically, the less frequented alleyway adjacent to where the figure stood, began to yield some disturbing local folklore. Public records from the period were largely silent on anything unusual in that particular alley, but digging into local archives, old newspapers, and even forgotten parish records, they unearthed whispers, tales of disappearances, not widely reported in the mainstream press, but nevertheless persistent in the oral histories of the area. These were not grand, sensational crimes, but rather quiet, unsettling vanishings of individuals from the lower strata of society, vagrants, street vendors, or those simply passing through. They weren't always linked, often attributed to the harsh realities of Victorian London, but the recurring pattern in that specific alley was undeniable. One specific legend emerged with chilling clarity: the Shadow Man of Dorset Alley. It was a local myth, a cautionary tale whispered among children and nervous adults about a shadowy figure said to lure people into the darkness of the alley, from which they were never seen again. Eleanor, ever the pragmatist, initially dismissed this as mere superstition, a product of an era steeped in folklore and fear. However, the uncanny geographical connection, the precise location of the disappearances aligning with the alley in the photograph, and the figure's fixed gaze into its depths became too strong to ignore. The coincidence felt less like an accident and more like a macabre echo across time. The weight of the evidence, coupled with Marcus's own growing disquiet, led them to the next logical step: bringing in a specialist. They contacted Clara Davies, a renowned forensic image analyst known for her cutting-edge work in digital forensics and historical image restoration. Clara arrived with her own suite of advanced AI-driven tools, designed to extract every last pixel of information from even the most degraded images. She approached the photograph with a detached scientific rigor, devoid of any preconceived notions about ghosts or legends. Clara began her analysis, her fingers dancing across the keyboard, running the image through layers of algorithms designed to detect tampering, enhance subtle details, and even reconstruct obscured elements. After hours of intense work, her initial findings were delivered with clinical precision. "This image has not been tampered with," she stated, her voice calm but firm. "There's no evidence of composite photography, no sign of post-processing manipulation. The figure is genuinely part of the original exposure." This confirmed Eleanor's gut feeling and Marcus's growing suspicion. Whatever this was, it was an integral part of the historical document itself. Next, Clara focused on the figure's obscured face, using sophisticated AI reconstruction techniques that pieced together fragmented data points, shadows, and subtle reflections. The results were chilling, displayed on the large monitor with stark, undeniable clarity. The eyes, once assumed to be unnaturally wide, were indeed unnaturally large, black, and almost entirely devoid of iris or pupil, giving them an insect-like, inhuman appearance. The skin, where visible, appeared pale, almost translucent, stretched tautly over what seemed to be an unfamiliar underlying bone structure. It was a face that belonged in a nightmare, not a 1908 street scene. Then Clara made another, even more disturbing discovery. Zooming in on the figure's wrist, where the faint metallic glint had been observed, she used an ultra-high-resolution filter. A faint, almost invisible wire-like object extended from the figure's wrist, so thin it was barely discernible. It snaked downwards, disappearing into the impenetrable shadows of the alley, a tether connecting the figure to something unseen, something hidden within the darkness. The implications were profound and terrifying. This wasn't merely a person in an odd costume. This was something else entirely. With Clara's irrefutable findings laid bare, Eleanor and Marcus were forced to confront an idea so outlandish, so utterly alien to their academic paradigms, that it felt like an assault on their very understanding of reality. The figure in the photograph was not human, or at the very least, not conventionally so. Marcus, a man whose entire career was built on the bedrock of historical fact and empirical evidence, visibly struggled with this impossible notion. His mind, trained to seek logical terrestrial explanations, scrambled to find an alternative. He suggested almost desperately that it could be a person afflicted with an extreme, undocumented physical deformity, or perhaps a highly unusual one-of-a-kind costume designed for some obscure private masquerade. He even floated the idea of a bizarre reflection, a trick of light and shadow playing on the primitive photographic emulsion. Though the detailed AI reconstruction of the face and the wire-like object from the wrist made such a theory increasingly untenable, Eleanor, however, felt a growing, visceral sense of dread. The details, once dismissed as anomalies, now coalesced into a horrifying narrative that defied every known historical context. The pale, translucent skin, the insect-like eyes, the sleek, uniform-like clothing, and especially that wire-like object emanating from the wrist, none of it fit. It screamed of something unnatural, something entirely outside the established timeline of human technological or biological development. The wire in particular was profoundly disturbing. It looked like technology, but of a kind that simply could not exist in 1908. It was too fine, too precise, too modern. The gravity of their discovery weighed heavily on Eleanor. This wasn't just an academic curiosity, It felt like a profound, unsettling truth that demanded to be revealed. She wanted to publish their findings, to present them to the wider scientific community, or at the very least, to a select group of trusted colleagues internally within the museum. But Marcus, his face etched with concern, strongly advised against it. "Eleanor, think of the ridicule," he pleaded, his voice low and urgent. "Our careers, the museum's reputation, they would be shattered. People will think we've lost our minds, that we're peddling conspiracy theories. We'll be a laughingstock." He argued vehemently for more research, for finding a conventional explanation, no matter how remote or unlikely it seemed. He believed there had to be a rational answer, a historical precedent, an overlooked detail that would bring the anomaly back into the realm of the explainable. Eleanor, however, felt a different kind of pressure. This wasn't just an anomaly. It felt like a warning, a message from the past or perhaps from elsewhere, demanding attention. She felt a moral obligation, a duty to those forgotten souls of Dorset Alley, whose disappearances had been dismissed as mere folklore and urban legend. This photograph, this impossible figure, might be the only witness to their fate. To suppress it, to hide it away, felt like a betrayal. While Eleanor and Marcus debated the ethical and professional implications, Clara remained focused on the data. Her advanced tools continued to probe the photographic emulsion, extracting every last shred of information. She shifted her focus from the figure itself to its immediate surroundings, particularly the background of the alleyway. And there she found more unsettling evidence, faint, almost imperceptible distortions in the air around the figure. It was like a heat haze, but without any discernible heat source. The air seemed to shimmer, to ripple, as if space-time itself was slightly warped in that localized area. These distortions were subtle, easily missed by the naked eye. But Clara's tools, designed to identify such minute variations, flagged them unequivocally. Then came another discovery, even more bizarre than the last. Clara detected extremely subtle, high-frequency sound waves embedded within the original photographic emulsion. These weren't audible to the human ear, nor were they ambient sounds from the street scene. They were only detectable with highly specialized equipment, an almost imperceptible vibration captured at the molecular level of the silver halide crystals. These sounds were not natural. They were rhythmic, mechanical, and very faint, a low, persistent thrumming, almost like a distant alien hum. It was a pattern, a pulse, unlike anything she had ever encountered in her years of forensic audio analysis. The implications of Clara's latest findings were profound. The heat haze distortions suggested a localized energetic phenomenon, something that could warp light and air itself. The rhythmic mechanical sound waves hinted at a device, a piece of machinery operating silently, almost imperceptibly within the fabric of that 1908 street. The team realized, with a growing sense of dread, that they were no longer dealing with a simple historical puzzle, a photographic oddity, or even a clever hoax. This was something far beyond their collective understanding, something profoundly unsettling that challenged the very foundations of their scientific and historical worldviews. The photograph, once a mere relic of the past, had become a portal to an unimaginable truth. Eleanor, despite Marcus's fervent warnings and the daunting implications, knew she couldn't simply bury this. The mechanical hum, the shimmering air, the inhuman face. This was not a matter to be debated solely within the hallowed halls of the museum. The weight of the unknown, and the potential for a deeper, darker truth, compelled her to seek outside counsel. She made a decision that would either validate her most terrifying suspicions or condemn her to academic ostracization. She contacted an old friend, Dr. Alistair Finch. Alistair was not your typical academic. A theoretical physicist by trade, he possessed a brilliant, albeit eccentric mind, renowned for his unconventional thinking and a willingness to explore the fringes of scientific inquiry. He had a reputation for tackling problems that baffled mainstream science, often with surprising, if sometimes controversial results. When Eleanor first reached out, describing the unexplained anomalies in an old photograph. Alistair's initial reaction was one of amused skepticism. He jokingly referred to it as her ghost photo, but his scientific curiosity, a quality Eleanor knew well, was piqued. He agreed to review Clara's meticulously compiled data and the high-resolution image, intrigued by Eleanor's uncharacteristic urgency. Alistair arrived at the museum a few days later, a whirlwind of disheveled brilliance, carrying a worn leather briefcase filled with what looked like arcane scientific instruments. He spent hours poring over Clara's analysis, his brow furrowed in intense concentration, occasionally muttering to himself in complex equations. He was particularly drawn to the heat haze distortions, the subtle ripples in the air around the figure, and the rhythmic, high-frequency sound waves embedded in the emulsion. As he worked, the amusement slowly drained from his face, replaced by a look of profound fascination, then disbelief, and finally, a dawning realization that mirrored Eleanor's own dread. He tapped a finger against the screen, pointing to the shimmering air. "These distortions, Eleanor," he began, his voice losing its playful edge. "They're not merely optical illusions. They are consistent with localized temporal displacement. Imagine a small, unstable bubble of time, momentarily overlapping with our own. A transient, almost imperceptible tear in the fabric of reality." Eleanor and Marcus exchanged stunned glances. Temporal displacement, time travel. The words hung in the air, heavy with impossibility. Alistair continued, his excitement growing as he connected the dots. "And these sound waves, this rhythmic pulse. It's not a natural phenomenon, it's too regular, too precise. My theory is that it's residual energy, a sonic footprint left by a device that facilitates this temporal overlap, this fleeting breach." He postulated that the figure wasn't simply in the photo, it was from somewhere else, possibly another time, caught in a momentary unstable temporal bleed-through. The photograph had captured the precise instant of this impossible intersection. Driven by his newfound hypothesis, Alistair then embarked on a frantic cross-referencing expedition. He urged the team to provide him with every scrap of historical data related to the specific location of the photograph and the exact date it was taken. He delved into meteorological records, local government archives, and even obscure historical reports, searching for anything that might corroborate his increasingly wild-sounding theory. And he found something startling. He uncovered reports of a small, localized blackout in the immediate vicinity of Baker Street on the exact day the photograph was taken. It had been a perplexing event at the time, briefly mentioned in local gazettes, and ultimately attributed to a faulty power grid or an overloaded circuit. But Alistair argued that a localized, unexplained power fluctuation could be a telltale sign of an energy drain, a disturbance consistent with a temporal portal opening or closing. It was a phenomenon that was highly unusual for the time, and its unexplained nature suddenly gained a terrifying context. He also revisited the anecdotal evidence of the disappearances in Dorset Alley that Eleanor and Marcus had uncovered. Alistair noticed a disturbing pattern. These vanishings, though dismissed as urban legend, seemed to spike around specific, unexplained atmospheric disturbances reported in old meteorological logs. Sudden, localized drops in temperature, strange electrical phenomena, or unusual fog formations that dissipated as quickly as they appeared. These were not common weather events, and their correlation with the disappearances was too strong to be mere coincidence. Then came the terrifying realization, delivered with a chilling calm that sent shivers down Eleanor's spine. "Eleanor Marcus," Alistair said, his voice grave. "The figure isn't just an accidental tourist from another time, caught in a temporal eddy. If my theories are correct, and all the evidence points to it, then the figure isn't observing the scene. It's not merely present, it's hunting." He paused, letting the implication sink in. The metallic glint on the wrist? That's not jewelry. It's a device. And the wire-like object Clara found extending into the alley? That's not a random anomaly. It's a tether, or perhaps an energy conduit. A tool. He then returned to the figure's fixed gaze, the unsettling focus into the dark mouth of the alley. That gaze isn't one of curiosity. It's not a glance, it's a predatory focus. It's looking for something or someone to exploit. The Shadow Man of Dorset Alley legend, once a quaint if disturbing piece of local folklore, suddenly took on a horrifyingly concrete and scientific new meaning. It wasn't a ghost, a spectral entity born of superstition. It was something else entirely. Something that exploited those temporal anomalies, those fleeting breaches in time to achieve its unknown, sinister purpose. The photograph wasn't just a historical document. It was a snapshot of a predator in action, frozen in time, a silent witness to an impossible crime. Eleanor, Marcus, and Clara, now fully convinced by Alistair's terrifying, yet meticulously supported theories, understood the profound implications of their discovery. This wasn't merely an academic curiosity. It was a matter of extreme public significance. They knew they could no longer keep this contained within their small circle. The truth, however unbelievable, had to be brought to light. The first step was to present their findings to a select, trusted group within the academic and museum hierarchy, individuals whose reputations and intellect they respected, hoping their collective authority would lend credence to what would undoubtedly be perceived as madness. The chosen few gathered in a hushed, sterile conference room deep within the museum's archives. The air was thick with anticipation and a palpable sense of unease. Eleanor, taking the lead, began by calmly outlining the photo's provenance, the initial discovery, and the meticulous process of enhancement and analysis. Marcus, despite his earlier reservations, provided the historical context, detailing the disappearances and the local folklore surrounding Dorset Alley. Clara then presented her forensic imaging analysis, showcasing the AI reconstruction of the figure's face, those unnaturally large, black, insect-like eyes, and the unsettling details of the wire-like conduit and the localized atmospheric distortions. Finally, Alistair Finch stepped forward, his usually flamboyant demeanor replaced by a solemn gravity. He laid out his theoretical framework, explaining temporal displacement, residual energy signatures, and the chilling hypothesis of a predatory entity exploiting these temporal weaknesses. He connected the localized blackout and atmospheric anomalies to the figure's appearance, painting a coherent, if horrifying, picture. The room fell into a stunned silence when Alistair finished. Faces around the table ranged from outright disbelief to dawning horror. Then, a soft, almost reverent voice broke the quiet. It belonged to Dr. Evelyn Reed, a renowned historian of the occult and ancient mysteries, a woman known for her encyclopedic knowledge of esoteric lore. Her eyes, usually sharp and analytical, now held a glint of profound recognition, almost fear. "Chronovores," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've only ever encountered them in the most obscure, almost mythical texts. Entities that feed on temporal energy, or perhaps displaced individuals. They were always considered mere allegories, warnings against meddling with time itself." Eleanor felt a cold dread settle deep in her bones. The confirmation, however esoteric its source, solidified their worst fears. This wasn't just a scientific anomaly. It was potential evidence of something truly sinister, a hidden predator that had haunted the edges of human history, leaving behind a trail of unexplained disappearances. The Shadow Man of Dorset Alley wasn't a ghost story. It was a historical account. The photograph was no longer just a scientific puzzle. It was a witness. The weight of this realization was immense. The team understood the profound significance. This photo wasn't just a scientific anomaly. It was potential evidence, a silent testament to the fate of the forgotten victims of Dorset Alley. These were individuals whose disappearances had been relegated to whispered folklore, their lives extinguished without explanation, their suffering unacknowledged. The photo, with its impossible figure, was their only witness, their only voice across the chasm of time. They felt a profound responsibility, a moral imperative to these long-lost souls. The decision was unanimous. They had to go public, not just with the photo itself, but with the full, meticulously documented scientific analysis and Alistair's compelling, albeit terrifying, theories. They would frame it not as a sensational claim, but as a groundbreaking historical discovery with profound implications for their understanding of time, reality, and the hidden forces that might operate just beyond their perception. They knew the backlash would be immense, the ridicule fierce, but the truth, they believed, was too important to suppress. The victims deserved justice and the world deserved to know. The story broke like a seismic event. Initial reports were cautious, hinting at an unexplained anomaly in an old photograph. But as the details emerged, as the high-resolution image of the figure, with its unnervingly wide eyes and strange attire, flooded news channels and online platforms, the cautious skepticism quickly turned into widespread fascination, then fear. The image of the Baker Street anomaly, as it was quickly dubbed, went viral. Mainstream media covered it extensively, dissecting every detail, interviewing Eleanor, Marcus, Clara, and Alistair, who found themselves thrust into an unexpected global spotlight. Experts from various fields weighed in, their opinions sharply divided. Some dismissed it as an elaborate hoax, a sophisticated manipulation of old photographic techniques. Others, particularly those in theoretical physics and obscure historical studies, cautiously acknowledged its unsettling nature, unable to easily refute the meticulous data presented by Eleanor's team. The scientific community was polarized, igniting a fierce debate that spilled from academic journals into public forums. The image of the figure from 1908 became iconic overnight. It was reproduced in newspapers, plastered across websites, and analyzed in countless documentaries. It became a symbol of unknown threats lurking in the seemingly mundane past, a chilling reminder that history might hold secrets far more profound and terrifying than previously imagined. People around the world, inspired by the team's courage and the sheer impossibility of the discovery, began to share their own unexplained family photos, old blurry images that suddenly took on new, unsettling meaning. This global conversation about hidden histories and potential temporal anomalies exploded, forcing humanity to confront the unsettling possibility that their understanding of the universe and their place within it might be far more limited than they had ever dared to conceive. The world, it seemed, was ready, or perhaps forced, to look a little closer at the past, and what looked back might not always be human. The widespread attention, the global conversation ignited by the Baker Street anomaly, led to an unforeseen and profoundly unsettling development. It was late one evening when Eleanor received an email, its subject line simply reading, "Regarding the 1908 London photo." The sender was a retired archivist named Arthur Pendleton, from a small private collection housed in a remote Scottish castle. He wrote with a quiet urgency, stating that he believed he possessed another photograph, taken in 1912 in Edinburgh, that showed a remarkably similar figure. Eleanor's heart pounded. Could it be? Another one? The implications were staggering. She immediately convened her team, sharing the email. Marcus, ever the historian, was cautious but intrigued. Alistair, however, was visibly excited, almost vibrating with anticipation. "This is it," he declared. "The corroboration we needed. A pattern, not just an isolated incident." Within days, Eleanor, Marcus, Clara, and Alistair found themselves on a train northward, the Scottish landscape blurring past their windows. They arrived at the ancient, stone-clad castle, a place steeped in centuries of history, and were greeted by Mr. Pendleton, a frail but sharp-witted man whose eyes held a flicker of deep concern. He led them to a dimly lit archive, its air heavy with the scent of old paper and leather. The photograph, carefully laid out on a velvet cloth, depicted a bustling market street in Edinburgh circa 1912. It was a vibrant scene, full of life, merchants hawking their wares, ladies in elegant hats, children chasing pigeons, horse-drawn carts navigating the cobblestones. At first glance, it appeared to be just another charming historical snapshot. But Eleanor knew where to look. With Clara's portable high-resolution scanner, they began the familiar process of digitization and enhancement. As the image resolved on the screen, a collective gasp escaped their lips. There it was. Tucked away in the background, partially obscured by a fruit stall, stood the figure. The same unsettling posture. The same dark, archaic clothing that seemed out of place yet subtly blended in with the shadows. This time, however, the figure was slightly clearer. The resolution of the original negative marginally better. The goggles that Clara's AI had reconstructed in the 1908 image were now revealed to be not goggles at all, but highly integrated optical sensors, seamlessly embedded into what appeared to be a dark, organic-looking mask. They were not mere protective eyewear. They were part of the entity itself, cold and calculating. The wire from the earlier photo was also more distinct, a thin, flexible conduit, almost organic in its texture, leading from the figure's wrist to a small, almost invisible device strapped to its back. A compact, energy harvesting unit, Alistair theorized, designed to be inconspicuous. And this time the figure was not just looking into an alley. Its head was slightly turned, its optical sensors fixed with unnerving precision on a young woman browsing a nearby flower stall. And almost imperceptibly, one slender, gloved hand was extended, a single finger reaching out, not quite touching, but undeniably directed towards her. It was a gesture of intent, not observation. A predatory reach. The chilling pattern was now undeniable. Eleanor's team, armed with this second, even more detailed piece of evidence, delved into the local history of Edinburgh, specifically around the market street depicted in the photo. Their research, aided by Mr. Pendleton's extensive knowledge of local folklore and forgotten records, unearthed a disturbing parallel. The specific alleyway adjacent to the market street in the 1912 photograph also had a history of disappearances. Not widely reported but whispered among the older generations. Young women specifically, who vanished without a trace, often around market days, and particularly around the spring of 1912, the exact time the second photo was taken. Each disappearance had been attributed to runaway youths or accidental falls into the nearby river, but the sheer number and the lack of any definitive explanation had always left a lingering sense of unease in the community. Alistair's theories, once considered radical, were now chillingly reinforced. These entities, these chronovores, as Dr. Reed had called them, were not random occurrences, nor were they passive observers of history. They were systematic, following a discernible pattern, consistently exploiting temporal weaknesses, perhaps drawn to concentrations of human activity or specific energy signatures. The two photos, taken 4 years apart, hundreds of miles distant, confirmed a terrifying reality. This wasn't a one-off event, a singular temporal bleed-through. It was a recurring phenomenon, an ongoing hidden predation woven into the fabric of human history. Eleanor and her team stared at the two images, side by side on Clara's screen. The figure in London, 1908, merging with the shadows of Dorset Alley, its gaze fixed on the darkness. The figure in Edinburgh, 1912, its gaze locked onto a vibrant, unsuspecting life, its hand reaching out. The true horror of their discovery settled upon them with crushing weight. The photos weren't just historical curiosities, not just scientific anomalies. They were snapshots of a hidden, ongoing threat, a dark, parallel history unfolding just beyond the reach of human perception. The figure in the 1908 photo wasn't just caught in the act by a lucky photographer. It was documented. Its presence, its intent, its very existence had been captured, preserved, waiting for someone to look closely enough, for technology to advance enough, to finally reveal its truth. The final revelation was a cold, hard truth. The past isn't always safely in the past. It's not a closed book, a finished story. Sometimes it reaches out through the veil of time, leaving traces, clues, warnings, and sometimes things from other times reach into ours, not as ghosts or legends, but as tangible, predatory entities. The photo from 1908, the one that had started it all, wasn't just a discovery. It was a profound, terrifying warning, echoing across a century, now amplified by a second, equally disturbing image. The world had been oblivious, but now, thanks to two seemingly ordinary old photographs, the veil had been lifted, and humanity was forced to confront a reality far more complex and dangerous than it had ever imagined. The revelation of the second photograph, the chilling confirmation of a pattern, sent ripples of profound unease across the globe. The scientific community, initially polarized, now found itself grappling with undeniable, meticulously documented evidence. The debates intensified, moving beyond mere skepticism to desperate attempts at alternative explanations. Governments, initially dismissive, were now quietly alarmed, convening clandestine meetings of experts to discuss the implications. The public, already fascinated by the Baker Street anomaly, was left with a profound existential sense of dread about the boundaries of time and reality. The chronovores, once relegated to obscure texts, were now a terrifying, tangible possibility. Eleanor Vance, once a respected but largely anonymous historical photo expert, found herself a reluctant hero. Her name became inextricably linked to the Baker Street anomaly, and now, the Edinburgh market shadow. She was sought after by media, consulted by academics, and quietly approached by intelligence agencies. The British Museum, recognizing the monumental significance of her team's discovery, swiftly established a new department, provisionally named the Anomalous Historical Phenomena Unit. Its mandate was clear: to systematically review historical records, photographs, and artifacts for similar anomalies, to understand the patterns, and perhaps to find a way to predict or even prevent future incursions. Marcus Thorne, his historical sensibilities forever altered, became its co-director, bringing his rigorous historical methodology to bear on the impossible. Clara Davies and Alistair Finch were integral to the unit, their specialized skills now indispensable in a world where the past was no longer static. In the quiet solitude of her office late one evening, Eleanor looked at the two photographs displayed side by side on her large monitor. The 1908 image of Baker Street, the figure a shadowy, indistinct menace in the alleyway. And next to it, the 1912 Edinburgh market photo, the figure clearer, its optical sensors fixed on the young woman, its hand reaching. The contrast was stark, the implication horrifying. The figure, once a blurry anomaly, a trick of light and shadow, was now a clear, terrifying entity, its predatory intent laid bare. She thought about the victims, the forgotten souls of Dorset Alley, their names lost to time, their disappearances dismissed as local folklore. The young women of Edinburgh, their lives abruptly cut short, their families left with no answers, only sorrow. For over a century, they had been just statistics, or worse, figments of local imagination. Now, thanks to the relentless pursuit of truth embedded in two old photographs, their stories were finally being acknowledged. The photos were not just warnings. They were posthumous witnesses giving voice to the voiceless. It was a small comfort, but a profound one. The world had irrevocably changed. The past was no longer a closed book, a neatly bound collection of events safely confined to history. It was a permeable membrane, a fluctuating tapestry, where threads from other times, other realities, could interweave with their own. The discovery had shattered the comforting illusion of linear time, forcing humanity to confront the terrifying fluidity of existence. Eleanor's gaze lingered on the Edinburgh image, then slowly shifted back to the original, the 1908 photograph that had started it all. She zoomed in, pushing the digital enhancement to its absolute limit, focusing on the figure's face. The AI reconstruction, now refined with data from the clearer second image, rendered it with chilling precision. Those unnaturally large, black, empty eyes stared back at her, devoid of emotion, devoid of humanity. They were like twin abysses reflecting nothing, absorbing everything. A shiver traced its way down her spine. She leaned back in her chair, the silence of the office amplifying the frantic thoughts in her mind. The implications were vast, terrifying, and unending. Was this an invasion? A scientific expedition gone horribly wrong? Or simply a natural, albeit horrifying, consequence of a universe far more complex than they had ever dared to imagine? A final voiceover, Eleanor's own, weary but resolute, echoed through the silence. We thought we knew history. We thought the past was safe, a series of fixed points, neatly categorized and understood. But some secrets, some things, they just wait for us to look close enough. They hide in plain sight, in the dusty corners of forgotten archives, in the faded emulsion of old photographs. And when we do look close enough, when we finally peel back the layers of time and ignorance, they look back. As her voice faded, the screen slowly zoomed further into the figure's reconstructed face in the 1908 photo. The large, black, empty eyes filled the frame, an infinite void staring out, not just at Eleanor but at everyone, at the entire world. And then, subtle, almost imperceptible, a faint mechanical click sound, like the closing of a lock, or perhaps the activation of a device, faded out as the screen went black, leaving only the lingering chill of the unknown. The hunt, it seemed, was far from over.